What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, talking today about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and some of the interesting stuff that I think is actually hidden throughout this story. So of course, I actually need to start this video off with a giant spoiler warning. We're going to be dissecting some major plot details, and of course, each of the different endings. So if you haven't beaten the game yet, or maybe you haven't even played it, now is definitely the time to try and click another video. Might I suggest my review of the game, because I absolutely loved it. Okay, that's your one warning. Let's get into this. So I think that a lot of people seem to be a little bit confused by certain aspects of the endings, because while there are 4 of them, many of them actually have very similar themes that seem to echo each other, which are things like death and the word Shura. Now before we get into Shura, you need to know what it means. This is actually sort of a Japanese being verb. Think of it like the word struggle or the word like love. You don't just do these things once, they're things you actively participate in. Well, Shura is actually the opposite of love. It's considered basically the word of conflict, of devastation. If you're somebody who's constantly just going around hurting every single person you encounter, like a serial killer or a warlord who just constantly hungers that next big battle, you would be considered somebody who is perpetually locked in Shura. Now, throughout the course of the story, we hear a lot of different characters mention this. They make it sound almost like the devil, or a thing that just eventually creeps up on all of us. In fact, almost every single person mentions it at some point, including the sculptor, several times mentioning it being something that has at one point possessed him and made it where he had to chop off one of his arms, which is obviously part of the reason he ends up becoming a giant demon as one of the optional bosses. Now here's the thing, I think that all of this is actually hinting at something that ties the 4 endings very, very cleanly together, despite the fact that they have such different conclusions. I think that what this is really trying to come down to is the fact that Sekiro is very much intended to be the opposite of Dark Souls. Now that's obviously the previous project that made FromSoftware so famous, but within the universe of Dark Souls, something is constantly going on, a cycle of eternal rebuilding. Things are just being perpetually torn down, dismantled, and sometimes just complete apocalypses are taking place, but eventually things come back. Everybody is stuck in these cycles of life and death. And I think that Sekiro is trying to show us the lighter side of that. The idea that demise is not always a detriment. Let's talk a little bit about one of the endings specifically, which is often considered the evilest of endings, which is Shura. This is where you decide to, in fact, help the Great Owl when you discover that he's alive, but after you manage to kill all of his enemies, you turn the blade on him as well, ended up stabbing him in the back, and his final word is also Shura, saying that you are just as evil as everybody else. You are possessed by the darkness. Now, what's really interesting about this is that after it, we get a little bit of text appearing at the bottom of the screen talking about a demon roaming the land forever, showing up and just traveling across the countryside for many years to come. And I think that this is actually a giant hint that death in this game is actually supposed to be a good thing. I think that the secret message that is hidden throughout Sekiro is that dying is a privilege. Being able to cease being is actually something that people should strive to obtain instead of constantly fearing it. Let's talk about the Divine Heir for a bit. So obviously, this is the person we're trying to rescue throughout the entire game. The Divine Heir is seemingly some sort of magical child. He has what's called dragon's blood within his veins. Although I don't really think it's dragon's blood, I actually think that this is just symbolism to just how much strength is in it, because dragons in Japanese mythology are often considered the things of the greatest power. And what's funny is that with his blood and with his blessing, we become immortal. Sekiro manages to continually get back up, but it does come at a price. While we are able to continually resurrect, of course there is the dragon rot. Everybody else ends up getting slowly more cancerous and more weakened as the price they pay in order for you to continue on. But what's interesting about the ending is that in a lot of them, the Divine Heir dies. He's actually pierced and destroyed by you. With your swords and with the different items you collect, you're able to actually slay this child. But what's really kind of peculiar to me is that only in certain of these endings is it really shown that Sekiro takes his life life afterward. Let's talk about the Eternity ending. So in this one, we actually see that Sekiro goes on to become a sculptor himself. In my opinion, he actually is the sculptor. This is implying that in his timeline, he failed the test. The actual tribute that he's supposed to pay is dying himself. Maybe not on this day, or maybe not right this second by stabbing himself with a sword, but I think that it's actually intended that he is somebody who is supposed to be blessed with death. Now that he has achieved his mission, dying is something he's supposed to do, at least at some point, which is why in the best ending we see him become basically a wandering shinobi in the West. Now I think that all of this is very, very vital because if you actually look at the greater context of the game, we notice that there's lots and lots of different totems and idols that are all throughout the world, some of them being these little Buddha statues they pray at. Now these are interesting because it's heavily implied that they're actually being crafted by the sculptor. It's almost as if it seems like every version of Sekiro is continually taking this test, and if they fail the test of death and rebirth, they're cursed to become the next sculptor until eventually they grow old, they give the arm to somebody else who then takes the test next. I definitely think that this is sort of the intended meaning behind all this, is that Sekiro is about the reward of your own conclusion, the reward of being able to die a good, honorable death. It's something we see again and again. Even when we're looking at the most evil character in the story, Genichiro, he's somebody who managed to actually transcend death by completely embracing evil. He actually manages to take the power of Shura, and instead of just meeting his untimely demise, he keeps picking himself back up. He manages to have the same might as Sekiro without actually walking the path of light. He does not have the Divine's Heir blessing, and yet, without the dragon's strength, he manages to continue onward, and even bring other people from beyond the grave. This is very obviously portrayed as a net evil and something that's actually harming the land, which is why I think that this is a very interesting statement by FromSoftware themselves. I feel like they're trying to tell us that they think that the best privilege of games is having a character who lives a nice full life that eventually does reach its end. But what do you think about it? Have you gotten a chance to unlock all 4 of the endings, and which is your favorite? I'm kind of mixed. I actually like a lot of them a lot for different reasons, but for some reason I'm actually partial to the evil ending. I really think the Shura ending is the most fascinating to me, because it would be cool to see him finally just sort of diving himself into the conflict for all eternity. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. And play this game if you haven't already. My god, I hope you haven't actually watched this video. Go play Sekiro. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, you know, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.